This is my true story. I spent years giving everything to my family. I worked, I paid, I sacrificed. But when my body grew old and my days turned quiet, they ignored me. No calls, no visits, no care. Birthdays passed like shadows. Holidays came and went in silence. I sat alone in the house I built, feeling like a ghost in my own bloodline. I thought this was how my life would end. Forgotten. But one day, a stranger knocked at my door with a letter in his hand, and what it revealed shocked my family forever. You won't believe what happened next. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people like me. My life was never easy, but I never expected it to be. From the time I was young, I understood that survival meant work, and so I worked every day without complaint. I woke before the sun and returned home long after it set, my hands raw, my back aching, my clothes soaked with sweat. I carried loads heavier than my body should have borne, but I told myself it was worth it. Every drop of sweat, every blister, every moment of pain was a gift I was giving to my family. I did not chase wealth for myself. I did not dream of grand houses or fine things. My only dream was to see my children grow strong, safe, and secure. When I married, I promised my wife that she would never carry the weight of the world alone. I promised her that I would work until my last breath if it meant putting food on the table and keeping a roof over our heads. And I kept that promise. I paid for the home we lived in with years of labor that bent my body but hardened my resolve. I worked extra shifts so that the children could go to good schools. I sold my only valuable watch to cover debts when bills piled too high. I went without so they could have. I smiled when they wore new shoes, even though mine had holes. I swallowed hunger so they could eat until they were full. The sacrifices never felt like losses because I told myself they were investments in love. When my children married, I dipped into the last of my savings to pay for their weddings. When they bought homes, I signed away money I could have used for my old age, telling myself I did not need it as long as they were happy. When debts found them, I paid them quietly, never asking for repayment, never demanding thanks. I thought my reward would come later, not in riches, but in love. I thought that one day, when I was no longer able to work, they would remember everything I had done. I thought gratitude would turn into care, loyalty would turn into companionship, and I would not be left alone. I poured every piece of myself into them. I stayed awake late at night fixing broken toys so they would smile in the morning. I worked through fevers so I wouldn't miss a paycheck. I walked home in the rain so the bus fare could be used for their lunches. My body was the foundation on which they built their lives, and I carried the weight gladly. To me, they were everything. My family was my pride, my wealth, my proof that I had lived a life of purpose. But as the years passed, I began to notice something I did not want to see. Gratitude faded. Visits became shorter. Calls became fewer. My sacrifices became stories they never asked to hear. They grew busy with their own lives, their own children, their own problems. At first, I told myself it was natural, that the young must chase their own futures. But as the silence between us stretched longer and longer, I realized it was not just distance. It was neglect. Still, I never stopped giving. Even when I felt forgotten, I reminded myself that love does not keep score. I continued to offer what I could, continued to believe that the bond of blood would hold us together. I thought of all the years I had spent working, all the moments of my youth I had surrendered, and I told myself it would not be in vain. Surely, I thought, they would not forget. Surely, they would remember. But they did forget. And the life of sacrifice that I thought would bind us together became the very reason I sat alone in old age, abandoned by the ones I had lived for. Loneliness is not something that arrives suddenly. It creeps in slowly, like a shadow stretching across the floor until it covers the whole room. After retirement, I thought my life would change in gentle ways. I imagined weekends with my children visiting, dinners where we sat together and shared stories, holidays where laughter filled the house. I believed I would watch my grandchildren run through the halls of the home I had built with my bare hands. Instead, what came was silence. The first months after retirement, I waited by the phone, expecting calls that never came. I told myself they were busy, that work kept them occupied, that distance made visits harder. But as the weeks stretched into months, I realized I was making excuses for people who had simply stopped caring. Birthdays passed without a card, without a voice saying, "Happy birthday, Dad." Holidays came and went, the calendar turning pages while my house stayed dark and empty. I cooked meals that no one shared, sat at tables that no one joined, and stared at doors that never opened. My neighbors saw me more than my own children did. They waved when they passed by, sometimes stopping to chat for a moment, asking if I was doing all right. Their kindness was small but real, and it reminded me that I was still human, still seen. But the people who should have been closest to me, the ones who carried my blood, acted as if I had already vanished. It was as though I had died long before death came for me. The loneliness changed me. It made the walls of my house feel heavier, the rooms colder. I would wake in the morning and sit by the window, watching cars drive past, wondering if one of them carried someone coming to see me, but no one came. I would sit on the porch as the sun set, hoping that a familiar face would appear at the gate, but it never did. Days blurred together, one empty moment after another, until time itself felt meaningless. I began to feel like a ghost in my own bloodline. My children carried on with their lives as if I had never existed. They posted pictures of their vacations, their celebrations, their successes, but in none of them was I present. I was erased, forgotten, invisible. And the more I saw their lives continue without me, the deeper the loneliness sank into my bones. Sometimes, at night, I would whisper to myself just to hear a voice. I would walk through the rooms, touching the walls, touching the furniture, reminding myself that I was still here, that I had built this place, that my life had once been full. But the echoes were my only answer, and they sounded too much like emptiness. The long loneliness broke me in ways even hard labor never did. Work had made my body ache, but neglect made my soul ache. I had carried my family through storms, through hunger, through struggle, and in the end, I carried only silence. And in that silence, I began to wonder if I was already gone, if I was nothing more than a memory no one wanted to remember. The breaking point came not in one loud moment, but in quiet rejection that cut deeper than any knife. My body had begun to fail me. Age was catching up faster than I expected. Simple tasks, like walking to the market or lifting groceries, became heavy burdens. My hands shook when I tried to cook, and some nights I could not even climb the stairs without resting halfway. I told myself it was just part of growing old, but deep inside, I knew I needed help. And so, with all the humility I could gather, I reached out to my children. I picked up the phone one evening, my heart heavy but hopeful. I dialed the number of my eldest, waiting for the warmth of recognition. Instead, I was met with a voice tired and impatient. When I explained that I was unwell, that I needed someone to stop by, I was met with silence. Then a sigh. "I'm busy, Dad," they said. "I'll try next week." But next week never came. I called another, hoping for a different response. This time, the words were sharper. "You're too demanding," they said. "We all have our own lives. You can't expect us to drop everything for you." Those words rang in my ears long after the call ended. Too demanding? After all the years I gave, after every meal skipped, every debt paid, every sacrifice made, they called me demanding for asking for a fraction of the care I once poured into them. Days passed. My health worsened. I reached out again, not for luxury, not for company, but for survival. I asked if they could help with medicine, if they could spend a few hours by my side. Again, I was brushed off. "We're busy," they said. Busy with work, busy with friends, busy with lives that no longer included me. Each rejection was like a door slamming shut, and soon I felt as though every door to my own family had been locked. That was the breaking point. I sat in my chair, weak and trembling, and realized I meant nothing to them anymore. I was not a father in their eyes. I was not a man who had given his life for them. I was just a shadow they wanted to forget, a weight they wished would disappear. The realization hit harder than any illness. My worth, in their eyes, had vanished. And with that realization, something inside me broke too. I accepted then that I would likely die alone, not with hands holding mine, not with voices whispering love, but with silence pressing against me, the same silence that had followed me for years. I thought back to the promises I once believed in, the love I thought was unshakable, and I saw now that it was all fragile, easily broken by time, by distance, by selfishness. The breaking point was not just about being refused help. It was about finally seeing the truth I had tried so hard to deny. My children did not care. They had erased me from their lives. And I, the man who had once lived for them, was now left to face the end with nothing but my own fading strength. The house had grown so quiet that even the ticking of the clock felt like thunder in my ears. I had stopped expecting anything. No visits, no calls, no kindness. My life had shrunk down to small routines, waking slowly, forcing myself to eat, sitting by the window to watch strangers pass by. I told myself that this was all there was left. Days blurred into nights, and nights dragged into days. Loneliness had become my only companion. Then, one afternoon, as I sat in my chair staring at the fading light, I heard something I had almost forgotten, the sound of a knock at the door. At first I thought my ears were playing tricks on me. Nobody knocked on my door anymore. My children didn't come, my family didn't visit, and the neighbors had grown used to my silence. The knock came again, firm but gentle, pulling me up from my chair with trembling legs. My heart raced as I shuffled to the door, unsure of what I would find on the other side. I opened it slowly, the hinges creaking, and there stood a man I had never seen before. He was younger, perhaps in his 30s, dressed plainly, his face kind but serious. In his hands he held an old envelope, worn with age, edges yellowed. The ink on the front faded but still visible. He looked at me with eyes that carried both respect and urgency, and in a voice soft but steady, he said, "This belongs to you." For a moment I just stared. I could not speak. My hands trembled as I reached out and took the envelope, feeling the rough texture of the paper, the weight of it heavier than I expected. I asked him who he was, why he had come, but he only smiled faintly and said, "I'll explain when you read it." His words carried no threat, only certainty. And with that, he stepped back, leaving me alone with the envelope that now burned in my hands like fire. I closed the door slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I sat down at the table, the same table where I had spent years eating in silence, and placed the envelope before me. My fingers traced over the faded handwriting. It was addressed to me, my full name written clearly. My breath caught in my throat. Whoever had written it had known me long ago, long enough to know how to reach me even after decades. I sat there, staring, afraid to open it. The knock at the door had already shaken me, but the thought of what might be inside left me trembling. Could it be a mistake? Could it be something meant for someone else? But deep inside, I knew this letter had waited for me, carried through time until the moment it was needed most. Finally, with hands that shook as much from fear as from age, I tore the seal. The paper inside crackled as I unfolded it. I leaned closer, my eyes straining against the faded ink, and began to read. And with each word, I felt my world shift. This was no ordinary letter. This was a piece of my past, a truth I had forgotten, a secret I had never expected to return. As I unfolded the fragile paper inside the envelope, my hands trembled so much I had to steady them against the table. The letter was old, the ink slightly faded, but the words were still clear enough to read. My heart pounded with every line, and it felt as though the walls around me leaned in closer with each word I absorbed. This was not just a letter, it was a key to a truth I had never known, a truth buried beneath decades of silence and neglect. The letter began by mentioning my name, written in the careful strokes of someone who knew me well. It spoke of years long past, of sacrifices I had made, and of promises left unspoken. My breath caught as I realized it came from a man I had once worked alongside, a partner in the early years when I was young and desperate to build a future. We had started something small together, a venture I abandoned when family responsibilities pulled me away. I had long since forgotten about it, believing it had withered away like so many of my own dreams. But here in my hands was proof that it had lived on. The words revealed secrets I could hardly believe. The letter detailed properties I had unknowingly been tied to, investments left in my name, and accounts preserved through the decades. My friend, it turned out, had honored my contribution, no matter how small, and had kept my share intact. He wrote that he had always intended for me to know, but life had taken him before he could deliver the message. This letter had been kept safe by his family, waiting for the right time to reach me. Now, after years of loneliness and being treated as though I was worthless, the truth had finally returned to me. I sat back in my chair, the paper shaking in my hands, tears clouding my vision. For so long, I had believed my life ended in sacrifice and emptiness, that every ounce of work I poured into my family had left me with nothing but neglect. But here, in faded ink, was undeniable proof that my sacrifices had left me far richer, far more powerful, than anyone, including myself, had ever known. The weight of that truth filled the room like thunder. It was not just money written into those words. It was dignity. It was justice. It was the answer to every night I had lain awake, wondering if I mattered, wondering if all those decades of labor had been for nothing. The truth in that letter told me I was not forgotten. My life had left a mark. My name still carried weight. I pressed the letter against my chest, closing my eyes as tears streamed down my face. My children had mocked me as useless, ignored me for years, treated me like a ghost. But this letter proved that the man they dismissed was still the man who had built everything. My blood, my sweat, my choices had created a foundation that time had not erased. And now, I finally knew. The hidden letter was not just paper. It was my resurrection. After reading the letter, I sat in silence for a long time, the paper trembling in my hands. My heart was pounding, my breath uneven, and my mind spinning. I felt as though I had been pulled back in time and dragged into the present all at once. That's when I remembered the stranger. The knock, his calm eyes, the way he had handed me the envelope as though he knew exactly what it meant. I rose from my chair with slow, shaky legs and opened the door again, hoping he hadn't gone too far. And there he was, waiting at the edge of my gate, as if he knew I would call him back. I asked him who he was and why he had brought this to me. He stepped closer, his voice quiet but steady, carrying the weight of someone who had come not for himself, but for duty. He told me his name and explained that he was the son of my old business partner, the very man whose handwriting I had just held in my hands. His father had passed years ago, but in sorting through old belongings, boxes of documents and records no one else cared to read, he had discovered this letter. Alongside it, he found official papers, contracts, and agreements that bore my name. They had been forgotten by time, buried under dust, but they were still valid, still alive, still carrying my rightful place in them. The stranger said he could not ignore what he had found. His father had always spoken of me with respect, even though I had left the business early. He said his father believed in honoring people, in keeping promises, in carrying fairness beyond the grave. And so when the son found these papers, he felt it was his duty to finish what his father could not. That was why he had come to my door, why he had placed that envelope in my hands. Fate had chosen him to deliver the truth that had waited 50 years to find me. I listened, my heart heavy with emotions I could not name. Gratitude, disbelief, sorrow, relief. All of them collided inside me until I could hardly breathe. For years I had begged for acknowledgement from my own children and received nothing but silence. And here was a stranger, tied to me not by blood, but by loyalty and honor, delivering the truth that my own family never gave me, that my life mattered, that my sacrifices had left something behind. that I was not worthless. He showed me more than just the letter. From his bag, he pulled documents carefully wrapped in plastic. He laid them on the table in front of me, and as I looked down, I saw my name written again and again. My signature from decades past. My part of the venture, preserved, untouched, still mine. The stranger explained that these shares had grown over time, protected and invested carefully by his father, until they were worth more than I could have imagined. I stared at the papers, my eyes filling with tears. The man I had thought forgotten had remembered me even after death, and his son had carried that memory to my doorstep. I reached out and placed my hand on the stranger's arm, my voice breaking as I whispered, "You don't know what this means to me." He looked at me with kindness, and he answered simply, "I think I do." My father wanted this truth to reach you. Now it has. In that moment I realized something powerful. Family is not always bound by blood. Sometimes it is bound by loyalty, by respect, by the willingness to honor another's worth. My children had abandoned me, erased me, treated me as if I was already gone. But this stranger had restored me. He had given me back my place, my dignity, and the truth my own family tried to bury in neglect. Fate had chosen him to deliver justice. And justice had arrived at my door in the hands of a stranger who carried the honor of his father. When the stranger left my house that evening, the papers and the letter lay spread across my table like pieces of a puzzle that had been hidden for half a lifetime. I sat there staring at them, hardly able to believe that they were real. My name, written in ink from decades ago, still held power. My signature, long forgotten by me, still commanded value. For years, I had been treated as though I was nothing but an old man waiting to die, a burden too heavy for his own blood. But now I realized I was far from powerless. I was the true holder of wealth, land, and authority that my children could never have imagined. The shift was not just financial. It was something deeper, something that changed the very air in my lungs. For the first time in years, I straightened my back. I lifted my head. I looked at my frail hands, the same hands my children mocked for being useless, and I saw them differently. These were not useless hands. These were hands that had signed documents, hands that had built a foundation, hands that still held authority through the ink preserved in those papers. My children had erased me in their minds, but the truth proved they had been blind. I thought back to every moment of humiliation, every ignored phone call, every birthday forgotten. I thought of the long nights I spent alone, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was even alive in anyone's memory. And then I looked down at the documents again. They reminded me that I was not invisible. The world still knew my name. The law still respected my signature. My life's sacrifices had left a mark my children could not erase no matter how hard they tried. The power shift was not about revenge. It was about dignity. For so long, I had felt stripped of it, begging silently for acknowledgement that never came. But now, I no longer needed to beg. I no longer needed to prove my worth with words. The truth sat in black and white on my table. It spoke louder than anything I could have said. It told me that while my children ignored me, the world had not. While they dismissed me as useless, time had preserved my strength. I realized then that I had a choice. For years I believed my story was over, that my ending would be written in loneliness and neglect. But with this letter, with these documents, my story had changed. I had the chance to decide how the final chapters of my life would be written. I could let my children continue to see me as nothing, or I could show them the truth, that the man they ignored still held the power to rewrite everything. I sat back in my chair, breathing slowly, and felt something I hadn't in years. Control. They had taken away my place in the family, but fate had handed me back something greater. Authority, independence, justice. And I knew without doubt that when the time came, the truth in that letter would shake their world. The day of revelation came quietly, though I had imagined it many times in my mind. I had kept the letter and documents safe, locked away but never out of sight. I read them again and again, reminding myself of the truth, letting the words strengthen me each time loneliness tried to break me again. But deep inside, I knew the truth was not only for me. It was for them too. The children who had erased me from their lives, who thought I was powerless, who believed my existence no longer mattered. The time had come for them to see what I held, to face what they had ignored for years. They arrived at my house one evening, unannounced, their faces full of the same false smiles I had grown used to. I could see it in their eyes. They had not come for me. They had come because whispers of something valuable had reached their ears. The silence of years had cracked only when they believed I might hold something worth their time. They sat around my table, asking questions about my health, pretending to care, their voices dripping with insincerity. I let them speak. I let them play their parts. And then, without a word, I reached into the drawer and pulled out the envelope. I laid the letter on the table between us. Their voices fell silent, their eyes narrowed as they leaned forward, curiosity turning into unease. I unfolded the letter slowly, deliberately, as though I had all the time in the world. My voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with each word as I began to read aloud. Line by line, I spoke the truth that had been hidden for decades, the forgotten business, the preserved shares, the proof of wealth and ownership that carried my name. I watched their faces change as the weight of the truth settled in. My eldest son's smirk faded, his jaw tightening with disbelief. My daughter's hands trembled as she tried to mask her shock, her eyes darting between the letter and me. The others shifted in their seats, fidgeting, whispering, as though the paper before them had shattered everything they thought they knew. And in a way, it had. Because in that moment, the man they had ignored for years, the man they dismissed as useless, was revealed to be the man who still owned everything. I finished reading and placed the letter flat on the table, my eyes meeting theirs one by one. The silence that followed was heavier than any words could have been. They knew. They could no longer deny it. The truth was undeniable, written in ink, sealed by time, preserved by honor. And it was mine. For years they had treated me as though I had no power, no value, no reason to be remembered. But now they saw the truth with their own eyes. I was not the powerless man they imagined. I was the rightful holder of wealth, of authority, of dignity. Their betrayal had not erased me. Their neglect had not destroyed me. The letter had carried me through time to this moment, and in this moment I rose above them all. I said nothing more. I didn't need to. The truth had spoken for me. The fallout from that night was not immediate. It came slowly, like waves crashing again and again, each one louder than the last. At first, my children sat frozen, staring at the letter on the table as if it were a ghost. Their faces were pale, their voices caught in their throats, their eyes refusing to meet mine. They had built their lives on the belief that I was nothing but a frail old man, powerless and forgotten. Now, in one moment, that belief had shattered. The silence between us was heavier than all the years of neglect combined. My eldest son was the first to break. His voice, once sharp and dismissive, now shook with desperation. He began to speak quickly, almost frantically, trying to explain why they had stayed away, why they had ignored me for so long. He said they were busy, that life had been difficult, that they had made mistakes. But his words sounded hollow, excuses wrapped in weak apologies. I had waited years for love, not explanations. His voice was too late. Then my daughter began to cry. She reached across the table, her tears falling onto her hands as she begged me to forgive her. She said she regretted everything, that she wished she had been there, that she never meant to hurt me. But her words, too, felt heavy with fear. I could see it in her eyes. The tears were not born of love. They were born of panic. Panic that their places in my will, their hopes of inheritance, had slipped through their fingers. The others followed, their voices overlapping in a chorus of regret, each one trying to outdo the other, each one desperate to prove that they still cared. But I sat in silence, watching them. For years, I had begged for their love in the quiet of my heart, whispered prayers into empty rooms, longed for even one visit, one call, one sign that I mattered. They gave me nothing. And now, when they finally came to me with open hands, I saw the truth. It was not my heart they wanted. It was my name, my wealth, my legacy. The fallout spread beyond that table. Word traveled quickly, as it always does in families. Relatives who had stayed silent for years now whispered about me, about the truth that had been revealed, about the power I still held. My children, once confident and proud, now walked with their heads lowered, ashamed not because they had hurt me, but because their greed had been exposed. They began to visit more often, bringing gifts, speaking in soft voices, pretending to care. But I knew better. Their love was an act, their kindness a disguise. They thought they could undo years of neglect with weeks of false sweetness. But I had already seen their true faces. I returned to my lawyer and finalized everything. The will was rewritten, clear and unbreakable. Every property, every account, every investment was secured beyond their reach. I left nothing for the ones who had abandoned me. Instead, I directed my fortune toward causes that mattered. Charities that fed the hungry, organizations that sheltered the abandoned, schools that gave children the chance to dream. I gave to those who understood the value of kindness, because kindness was the one thing my own blood had refused me. When my children learned of this, the begging turned into anger. They accused me of betrayal, of cruelty, of being unfair. They shouted that after everything they had done for me, I had no right to cut them out. I laughed bitterly at those words. After everything they had done for me, they had given me silence, they had given me neglect, they had given me humiliation, and now they wanted reward. Their anger rolled off me like water. The decision was already made. The fallout was complete when I looked each of them in the eye and said, "You ignored me for years. You erased me from your lives. And now, I have erased you from mine." Their faces, filled with shock and pain, were the mirror of what I had felt for years. For once, they knew what it was to be unwanted, to be cut away, to be forgotten, and that was justice. Justice for me did not arrive with shouting or revenge. It came slowly, quietly, like sunlight pushing through the cracks of a dark room. For years, I had lived with emptiness, ignored by the very family I had sacrificed everything for. I had sat alone through birthdays, holidays, and nights so silent that even the ticking of the clock felt like a cruel reminder that I no longer mattered to anyone. I had begged in silence for recognition, for love, for care, and none of it ever came. They erased me from their lives long before they thought of erasing me from their inheritance. But fate had other plans, and when that stranger knocked at my door with a letter in his hand, my story turned in a way none of them expected. The justice I found was not about punishing them. It was about reclaiming myself. The letter proved that my life had left a mark, that the sacrifices of my youth had not been in vain, that I was still tied to something powerful. For decades, my children treated me as if I was powerless, as if I was just an old man taking up space, waiting to die. But that paper showed the truth. I was still the foundation of everything, still the name written into documents that held weight, still the man whose life had meaning beyond their neglect. And when I revealed it to them, when I laid that letter on the table and watched their faces pale, I felt something I had not felt in years: dignity. Their panic, their begging, their sudden tears did not move me. I had cried alone too many nights for their tears to mean anything now. I had believed too many of their excuses, swallowed too many lies about being too busy, endured too many silences to believe their sudden words of regret. No, their desperation came not from love, but from fear. Fear of losing what they believed they were owed. But I owed them nothing. They had abandoned me when I needed them most. They had erased me when all I wanted was to be remembered. They had taken my love and given back neglect. And so I made my choice. I rewrote my will with a steady hand. I left them nothing. Not the house they ignored, not the savings they counted on, not the legacy they believed belonged to them. Instead, I redirected everything to causes and people who understood what my family never did: kindness. I gave to charities that fed the hungry, because I remembered what it felt like to go without. I gave to shelters that cared for the elderly, because I knew the pain of being abandoned. I gave to schools that helped children dream, because my own dreams had once been buried under endless work. My legacy would not die in silence. It would live on in places where love still mattered. And I found peace in that decision. For the first time in years, I no longer felt powerless. I no longer felt erased. I no longer felt invisible. The stranger's letter had restored more than just wealth. It had restored my dignity. It had reminded me that justice is not always loud, but it is always certain. My children ignored me for years, but the truth they tried to bury rose back up and shook them to their core. That was my justice. Now I spend my days in quiet peace, not surrounded by greedy hands, but by genuine kindness. Neighbors stop by to share meals. Strangers who became friends sit and listen to my stories. I am no longer waiting for love from those who never gave it. Instead, I am giving my time and my final years to those who remind me that respect still exists. My family may have turned their backs, but I have turned my heart toward those who see me, not for what I can give them, but for who I am. And so, my story ends with truth. They ignored me for years, but one letter made them remember and regret forever. That is justice.